Good evening, everyone. We've all heard the phrase no contact, the moment when you finally step away from a relationship that no longer serves you, to heal, rediscover yourself, and gain clarity. But just when you think you found your peace, he texts you. Maybe it's a simple hey, or a cryptic message like, I was just thinking about you. And you're left wondering, why now? Let me tell you the truth, he's testing you. And today we're going to break down why this happens, what it really means, and how you should respond, if at all. See, when you go no contact, you take your power back. And that sudden silence, it shakes him. It's in that silence that he starts to question his own significance in your life. Did you really move on? Are you truly better without him? That's where the test comes in. Sometimes the test looks like kindness. Sometimes it's confusion, guilt tripping, or even manipulation. But in all its forms, the test is not about love. It's about control, curiosity, or ego. You need to be prepared emotionally and mentally, because how you respond to the test can either reopen old wounds or solidify your healing. So when that message comes, remember, you are not being offered closure. You're being offered a test. And your response or your silence is your final answer. Choose power, choose peace, choose you. No contact empowers you. It's not just ignoring someone. It's reclaiming your peace, identity, and clarity. His test is about ego, not love. Reaching out after silence is often driven by insecurity, curiosity, or the need for validation. Testing takes many forms. These can include flirty texts, guilt trips, fake emergencies, or manipulative tactics. Silence shakes his control. When you don't chase or respond, it disrupts the dynamic he was used to. Your response defines your boundaries. How you react can either reset the cycle or reinforce your growth. You don't owe a response. Choosing not to respond is also a powerful message that your healing matters more than reopening old doors. Let me know if you'd like a version tailored for social media, YouTube, or podcast scripting. No contact isn't just a tactic, it's a transformation. It's a conscious decision to remove yourself from a cycle that was either emotionally draining, confusing, or simply no longer serving your growth. At its core, going no contact is an act of radical self-respect. It's the moment you stop giving someone unlimited access to your energy, your time, and your emotions, especially when that access wasn't being honored or valued. When you initiate no contact, you're saying, I choose me. You're stepping out of reaction mode and into reflection mode. You're no longer responding to every message, call, or emotional breadcrumb that's tossed your way. Instead, you're creating space to breathe, to heal, and most importantly, to gain clarity. Because when you're constantly engaged with someone who confuses you or hurts you, it becomes almost impossible to see the relationship for what it really was. Distance brings truth into focus. No contact is where the real inner work begins. It's uncomfortable at first. Sometimes it feels like you're losing something, but what you're actually doing is rebuilding your confidence, your voice, and your emotional stability. You start to remember who you were before the chaos, before the emotional highs and lows blurred your sense of reality. This boundary you set with no contact sends a message, not just to the other person, but to yourself. It tells the world that you are no longer available for inconsistency, manipulation, or half-hearted love. It tells your own heart that it deserves peace, not pressure. It also teaches you that your worth is not up for debate or determined by someone else's attention or approval. And here's something many people don't realize. No contact is powerful because it removes you from the equation he used to rely on. Whether he was used to your emotional responses, your forgiveness, or your availability, all of that vanishes the moment you stop playing the game. He can't gauge your feelings. He can't predict your next move. You become a mystery again. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. No contact shifts the dynamic. It turns the emotional tables. And that shift isn't about revenge, it's about recovery. When you disconnect, you give yourself the chance to heal without interference. You allow your nervous system to calm down. You silence the noise. And that silence becomes your strength. Ultimately, no contact is not about getting them back, changing them, or proving a point. It's about proving something to yourself, that you have the power to walk away from what hurts and walk toward what heals. When a person reaches out to you after you've gone no contact, especially after a breakup or a period of emotional distance, it's important to recognize that this contact isn't necessarily rooted in genuine love or affection. While the surface level interaction might appear caring or thoughtful, in many cases, it's actually driven by something much deeper: his ego. Let's break this down. The ego is that part of a person that craves validation, recognition, and quite frankly, control. It thrives on being fed attention and admiration, and it can't bear the idea of being forgotten, discarded, or replaced. After all, how does a person with a fragile ego cope with the idea that you, someone who once invested your time, energy, and emotions into them, have now chosen to disconnect and move forward without them? The answer is simple. They don't like it. Their ego gets bruised, and they want to fix that by testing whether they still have the power to impact you. The reason why this test isn't about love is that love is about understanding, respect, and empathy. It's about the other person's well-being and valuing their emotional needs. Ego, on the other hand, is about the self. It's about feeling important, desirable, and needed. When he reaches out after no contact, there's often an element of self-interest lurking behind it. He might be testing whether you still care, whether you'll drop everything for him, or whether he can still pull you back into a dynamic that centers around his emotional comfort. If he succeeds in getting a reaction from you, it feeds his ego and reassures him that he still has the upper hand. Sometimes the test takes on subtler forms. He might message you with something that seems harmless at first, a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" Or "I was just thinking about you." But the intention behind the message is not as innocent as it may seem. It's a way for him to gauge how much emotional leverage he still has over you. In these moments, he's measuring his power, not because he's concerned about your well-being, but because he wants to feel significant again. This is the kind of behavior driven by ego, not love. In relationships, especially those that end in hurt, people often mistake the absence of love for the absence of the person. But sometimes what someone truly misses is not you, but the feeling of being wanted. They miss the comfort of having someone there to fill the space that their ego needs. This isn't love. It's an unhealthy attachment to the validation they were getting from you. When a person is driven by ego, their need to test you isn't about rekindling a real connection. It's about getting a reaction, any reaction, even if that means dragging you back into old toxic patterns. And the real danger here is that if you fall into this trap, you're playing into the game of ego, and you'll find yourself right back where you started, constantly chasing validation and scrambling for emotional breadcrumbs. At the end of the day, ego tests don't offer the clarity or closure that love does. Love would show up in the form of respect, understanding, and the willingness to allow you the space to heal. Ego shows up in manipulation, uncertainty, and the need for reassurance. And it's crucial to recognize the difference, because if you're responding to the ego, you're not participating in a healthy, loving dynamic. You're simply feeding a cycle that ultimately serves no one but his need for control and validation. When we talk about someone testing you after no contact, it's important to understand that these tests can look very different depending on the person and the dynamics of your relationship. These tests are often subtle, and their purpose is not always transparent. They may not be as straightforward as you'd like them to be, and they can sometimes be manipulative or disguised as something benign. Recognizing the different forms these tests can take is crucial, as each one serves a different psychological function. And knowing how to respond or whether to respond at all can make all the difference in maintaining your personal boundaries and emotional well-being. 1, the casual check-in. One of the most common forms of testing after no contact is the seemingly innocent casual check-in. He may reach out with a simple text or call that sounds harmless. Hey, how have you been? Or just wanted to see if you're doing okay. On the surface, this might look like an attempt to reconnect and check on your well-being. But more often than not, this is a subtle test to see if you're still emotionally available, whether you're still invested in the relationship or whether you've moved on. It's his way of gauging how much power or control he might still have in the situation. He's trying to determine if he's still relevant in your life. The danger here is that the question seems so innocuous. It's easy to fall into the trap of responding, which could reignite emotional patterns or even give him the opportunity to pull you back into a dynamic that isn't healthy. 2, the emotional guilt trip. Sometimes tests aren't about direct communication at all. Instead, they come in the form of emotional manipulation, such as a guilt trip. For instance, he might mention how he's been struggling without you, how much he misses you, or how he really needs you in his life right now. This can come across as a moment of vulnerability, but in reality, it's a strategy to make you feel responsible for his emotions, to guilt you into returning to the relationship, or to make you feel bad for having moved on. This tactic works because it appeals to your empathy, but it's important to recognize that it's not genuine concern. It's emotional manipulation designed to get a reaction out of you. 3, the accidental encounter. Another form of testing involves creating accidental encounters. Maybe he'll show up where you're known to frequent, or he'll try to have a casual conversation in a place where he knows you'll be. In these situations, he's looking for an opening to see if you'll engage, if you'll show that you're still interested, or if he can somehow reinsert himself into your life without directly asking for it. He might try to test your emotional strength by making it seem like fate or chance brought you together, which can create confusion. But in reality, it's a way of seeing whether you still react positively to his presence, giving him the emotional reassurance he craves. 4, the ex-baggage question. Sometimes the test comes in the form of probing questions about your personal life post-breakup. He may ask questions about whether you've been seeing other people, whether you've moved on, or whether you're happy without him. These questions are often disguised as casual conversation, but their underlying motive is to assess whether you're still emotionally tied to him. It's his way of making sure he hasn't been replaced or forgotten, and it might even be a way of fishing for confirmation that you're still hurt or still invested in the relationship. The intention behind these questions is rarely about genuine curiosity. It's more about determining whether you're moving on or if you're still emotionally tethered to him in some way. 5, the backdoor compliment. Another test could come in the form of backhanded compliment or positive reinforcement that's designed to make you second guess yourself. For example, he might say things like, "You always knew how to make me happy," or "You're way too good for me, but I'm glad I had you in my life." At first, these may seem like compliments or signs of regret, but what they are really doing is creating emotional ambiguity. He's appealing to your sense of worth, trying to make you feel special or needed, all while testing your reaction. His goal is to see if you'll feel flattered, nostalgic, or even start second guessing whether the breakup was a mistake. These types of statements are subtle but effective ways of planting doubt in your mind about the relationship's end. 6, the unexpected crisis. One of the most manipulative ways of testing someone is by creating or presenting an emergency or crisis. This can look like an unexpected emotional outburst, an issue that he needs your help with, or a personal drama he suddenly needs you to help solve. The idea behind this test is to see whether you'll drop everything to rush in and provide emotional support, signaling that you're still available to him despite the no context period. Whether the crisis is real or exaggerated is irrelevant. What matters is that it's a way to see if you'll still prioritize him over your own emotional boundaries. By presenting an urgent need, he may be trying to see if you still care enough to respond to his drama, which indirectly gives him the power to manipulate your emotions. Each of these tests is crafted to elicit a response from you, whether it's emotional, psychological, or even physical. What's important to note is that these forms of testing are rooted in self-interest, and they tend to ignore or downplay your own emotional needs. By recognizing these tests for what they are, attempts to assess your emotional attachment or pull you back into unhealthy dynamics, you can make better decisions about how to protect your peace and respond in a way that aligns with your healing process. One of the most profound things you can do after a breakup or a period of emotional turbulence is to embrace silence. At first glance, silence might seem passive or even weak. It's easy to assume that speaking up, explaining yourself, or confronting the other person will give you the closure you seek. But in reality, silence is one of the most powerful tools you have, particularly when you're trying to break free from a relationship dynamic that was rooted in control or emotional manipulation. When you decide to engage in no contact, you are not just walking away from the relationship itself, you are taking away the one thing that often fuels toxic dynamics, your reaction. For many people, especially those with controlling tendencies, the need to monitor, manipulate, or influence the other person is central to the relationship's power dynamics. They may have grown accustomed to your emotional responses, your anger, your frustration, your eagerness to fix things, or your willingness to forgive. These reactions, whether positive or negative, provided them with a sense of control over you and the situation. They knew that if they pushed your buttons, you would respond. They knew if they played on your emotions, you'd likely try to address the issues, even if the relationship was fundamentally unhealthy. And when you no longer give them that, when you withhold your reaction and refuse to play into their games, you disrupt their sense of control. Silence in this context can be an incredibly powerful weapon. It forces the person to confront the reality that they no longer have direct access to you. They can't rely on your empathy, your forgiveness, or your desperation for closure to regain emotional access. Silence takes away the predictability of your behavior, making it impossible for them to anticipate how you'll respond or whether you will respond at all. This uncertainty shakes their sense of power and leaves them in a state of confusion and discomfort. Control thrives on certainty. In a controlling dynamic, one person often holds the reins, pulling the other person back into the fold whenever it seems like they might get away or lose interest. But when you stop reacting and stop engaging in the emotional drama, you remove that certainty. Suddenly, they don't know where they stand with you. They no longer know if they still have a place in your heart or if you've truly moved on. This ambiguity is uncomfortable for someone who thrives on control because it removes the stability they've come to rely on. Their ego struggles with the unknown, and that discomfort can often be far more powerful than an argument or confrontation. This is where silence shakes things up. When you don't respond immediately or emotionally, the power balance begins to shift. It forces them to either confront their own feelings of insecurity and vulnerability or walk away entirely. Neither of these options is appealing to someone who is used to having control, and both options contribute to their emotional turmoil. If they reach out to you, they may do so to test whether their emotional hold over you still exists. But if you don't engage, you're sending a strong message that you're no longer available for manipulation, emotional games, or being a pawn in their struggle for control. In many cases, when the person realizes that their tactics aren't working and you're not budging emotionally, Their feelings of powerlessness may begin to surface. They might start to second guess their actions, question what went wrong, or wonder if they've lost you for good. And this inner turmoil is exactly the discomfort they would have sought to avoid had you been the one to initiate contact, constantly trying to mend things or prove that you still emotionally invested. In essence, silence forces them to face the reality of the situation, that their behavior and control tactics no longer have a hold over you. What's important to remember in this context is that silence isn't about punishing the other person. It's about protecting your peace and reclaiming your emotional autonomy. By remaining silent, you remove the possibility of being drawn back into old patterns or being used to fulfill someone else's emotional needs. You choose not to feed into their need for validation or comfort. Instead, you give yourself the chance to heal and redefine what a healthy emotional dynamic looks like. And that means stepping away from the role you once played in their emotional world. Ultimately, silence is a form of self-respect. When you stay silent, you're no longer allowing the other person to dictate the rhythm of the relationship. You are no longer engaging in the emotional dance they might have led for so long. The control they once held over you begins to crumble. And in its place, you create a space for self-healing, clarity, and emotional independence. By choosing silence, you force both yourself and the other person to confront the reality of your emotional needs, your boundaries, and the necessary separation that will allow you to move forward. It's not a weakness, it's a strength, because it requires you to trust that the best path forward is one in which you are no longer entangled in toxic dynamics or dependent on the validation of someone who doesn't fully respect you. The way you respond to someone's attempt to reconnect with you after a period of no contact plays a crucial role in defining the boundaries you've established for yourself. Boundaries are not just about setting limits on what you will or won't tolerate from others. They are also a reflection of how you value yourself and how you expect to be treated. When you decide to engage or not engage with someone after no contact, your response sends a clear message about what you are willing to accept in your life and what you are no longer willing to tolerate. At the heart of this point is the idea that your emotional energy is yours to protect. Every response, every action, and every decision you make after a breakup or a period of emotional distance either strengthens or weakens the boundaries you've set for yourself. The test that comes in the form of someone reaching out after no contact is not just a test of your feelings for them, it's a test of how well you understand your own worth and whether you are committed to honoring your emotional needs. When you respond impulsively or with an emotional reaction that stems from nostalgia, hurt, or insecurity, you might unintentionally weaken the very boundaries you've worked hard to establish. It can be easy to fall into the trap of thinking that engaging with them will provide the clarity or closure you're seeking, but in reality, it can perpetuate a cycle where you're constantly giving your emotional energy to someone who hasn't shown the respect or care you deserve. Your response becomes a signal to the other person that they still have access to your emotions, your time, and potentially your life, regardless of the pain they may have caused. On the other hand, when you choose not to respond or to respond with clarity and calm, you reinforce your boundaries. Not responding can be incredibly powerful because it signals to the other person that you are no longer willing to participate in the emotional games of the past. It's a clear message that you value your emotional peace above their need for validation. When you choose not to engage, you also signal that your healing process is more important than reopening old wounds or re-engaging in a relationship that didn't serve you. Furthermore, when you respond thoughtfully, whether it's with a brief message outlining your reasons for no contact or a more detailed explanation of your boundaries, you are teaching the other person how to treat you moving forward. By calmly and firmly stating that you are not interested in reopening the relationship or that you need continued space to heal, you reinforce the boundary that you have put in place for yourself. This isn't about being harsh or dismissive. It's about being clear and consistent. It's about showing that your emotional well-being is not negotiable and that you are not available for anything less than respect and mutual care. One of the most common pitfalls people encounter when trying to set boundaries is the fear of seeming mean or cold. Many people struggle with the idea of being perceived as harsh or unfeeling, especially when they are still emotionally attached to the person in question. But it's important to understand that setting boundaries is not about being unkind or cruel. It's about protecting your peace and ensuring that your needs are respected. Boundaries create the space for healthier, more balanced relationships, whether with yourself or with others. And often, the person reaching out to you after no contact may not understand the reasons behind your silence or your decision to not re-engage right away, but that doesn't mean it's any less valid. In fact, the more clearly and consistently you communicate your boundaries, the more you teach others how to respect them. In some cases, people might test your boundaries further after you've set them. They may try to push your limits, test your resolve, or appeal to your emotions to get you to let your guard down. This is especially common in relationships where manipulation or control was a part of the dynamic. The key here is to remember that each response you give to this test is another opportunity to affirm or weaken your boundaries. If you give in once, it may create the expectation that you'll give in again. If you make an exception, you risk losing the progress you've made in defining your emotional space. Every time you hold firm, however, you reinforce your right to have your boundaries respected, and more importantly, the value of those boundaries in your own life. Your boundaries are your emotional armor, and they are designed to keep you protected from negativity, manipulation, and emotional exhaustion. Each time you protect those boundaries, you are protecting your inner peace and well-being. Whether it's a silent response or a clear verbal one, how you react tells both you and the other person where you stand emotionally and where the relationship can or cannot go from there. In essence, your response defines your relationship with yourself as much as it defines your relationship with others. It's not about them, it's about you. Every decision to protect your space, every refusal to engage in toxic dynamics, and every time you choose peace over conflict or manipulation is a powerful affirmation that you respect and love yourself enough to prioritize your emotional health. And in doing so, you teach the world how to treat you, showing them that your time, your energy, and your heart are not to be taken for granted. One of the harshest truths that people often face after implementing no contact is that despite your best efforts to create space and clarity for yourself, the other person may not respect your boundaries. This can be incredibly frustrating and confusing, especially when you're trying to heal and reclaim your emotional peace. The fact that someone would disregard your need for space after you've made it clear can feel like a violation, making the healing process even more complicated. However, it's important to understand that this lack of respect for your no contact isn't necessarily a reflection of your worth or the quality of your boundaries. Instead, it's often a sign of their emotional immaturity, selfishness, or their inability to handle their own emotions in a healthy way. In many cases, when someone doesn't respect your no contact, it's because they are unable to let go of the dynamic that existed before, whether due to attachment, ego, or a sense of emotional entitlement. The emotional bond between two people can be difficult to break, even when one party recognizes that it's over. For some, the idea of losing control or the emotional dependency they developed on the relationship becomes so overwhelming that they resort to manipulating or disregarding your boundaries in order to maintain some semblance of connection. They may feel entitled to your time, attention, or emotional energy, believing that they have the right to re-enter your life whenever they choose, regardless of your feelings. One common form of this disregard is repeated contact, even after you've made it clear that you need space. He may reach out via text, phone calls, social media messages, or even through mutual friends or family. This behavior is often rooted in the belief that if they keep trying, eventually you'll respond, and eventually they'll regain access to the emotional connection that they had before. The thing is, this is not a sign of love, but rather a sign of selfishness or emotional dependence. They may be testing your resolve, or worse, they may be attempting to break your boundaries down one contact at a time until they can reassert their emotional hold over you. It's also crucial to note that disrespecting your no contact is not always done maliciously, although it can feel deeply hurtful. Sometimes the person reaching out may simply not understand why you need space, or they may not be capable of comprehending the emotional damage that their actions caused. In some cases, they may not even realize that by continuing to contact you, they are creating more emotional turmoil for you. For people who struggle with emotional maturity or self-awareness, boundaries may seem like arbitrary or temporary obstacles, something to be tested or challenged until they get the desired outcome. They may also have unresolved feelings or unresolved guilt that they're trying to process by reconnecting with you. In these situations, the lack of respect for your no contact might stem from their own confusion, emotional discomfort, or avoidance. Another reason someone may not respect your no contact is because they may still be emotionally attached to you, and they're trying to avoid confronting their own feelings. Emotional attachment can sometimes cloud judgment, making it difficult for a person to see that their actions are creating more harm than healing. They may believe that reaching out to you, even when you've clearly asked for space, is their way of fixing things. Or they may think that if they just say the right thing, you'll forget the pain and jump back into the relationship. Their inability to respect your no contact reflects their emotional turmoil and desire to hold on to something that is no longer healthy for either of you. This disregard for boundaries can also manifest as gaslighting or manipulative behavior. The person may downplay the significance of no contact, claiming that it's not a big deal or that you're overreacting. They might say things like, "I didn't think it was a big deal to reach out," or "I didn't realize you needed space." In essence, they are trying to invalidate your decision, making you question whether you were right to set the boundary in the first place. Gaslighting is an incredibly damaging form of manipulation that seeks to undermine your reality and make you doubt your own feelings. If you're experiencing this, it's important to recognize that your no contact was a necessary and valid choice, regardless of how the other person tries to minimize it. Ignoring or disrespecting your no contact can also be a way for the other person to hold on to their sense of power. Relationships where one person dominates or manipulates the other often come with an underlying power struggle. Even if the relationship has ended, the person might still want to maintain some control, whether it's over your emotions, your actions, or your willingness to engage with them. They may continue testing your boundaries, reaching out repeatedly, or trying to provoke a reaction because they want to see if they can still manipulate or influence your feelings. In cases like these, the person's disregard for your no contact is not a reflection of love or care, but rather a desire to hold on to control, even if that means causing more emotional confusion for you. This is why it's essential to stay firm in your decision to maintain no contact. It's easy to give in to the temptation to respond when someone is reaching out, especially if the messages seem heartfelt or emotionally charged. But remember, giving in to these attempts to break your no contact does not lead to healing or resolution. It only prolongs the cycle of emotional manipulation and leaves you vulnerable to being dragged back into a toxic dynamic. When someone consistently disrespects your no contact, you need to reinforce your boundary by not responding. Silence is often the best response in these situations because it shows that you are serious about your decision to prioritize your emotional well-being, and it helps protect you from the emotional roller coaster they might be trying to draw you back into. Ultimately, if someone doesn't respect your no contact, it's an opportunity for you to stand firm in your own self-worth. It's a test of your boundaries. Not just with them, but with yourself. By sticking to your decision, you are proving to yourself that your emotional peace is worth more than any attempts at manipulation or emotional turmoil. It's an affirmation that you value your healing and your personal growth more than getting caught up in someone else's emotional drama. And while it's painful, especially if you still care about the person, this act of self-respect is crucial to moving forward with your life in a healthier, more fulfilling direction.